The Olympics start next week, and I wanted to make a video looking at one of my favorite events of the Olympics, which are the two soccer tournaments. Today I'm going to be looking at the women's football tournament. And before I break down the three groups, I wanted to mention a few things that are interesting to note about this tournament. The first is that if you look at the start date of the Olympics, the football tournament actually starts 2 days before the opening ceremony. So if you want to watch the soccer games, if you look, it'll say the Olympics opening ceremony is on this day, but you make sure to watch it 2 days before because that's when the first games actually are. And the second important thing to note is that this is a 12-team tournament, so there's three groups of four, which is really odd for a major international tournament. Most of the tournaments are either 16 teams, 24, or 32. I think 16 and 32 are the best, probably. Although I do like the 24 format, which is what the Euros this past summer in France were. The reason why it's important to note the oddities of the 12-team tournament is that, number one, like with most of the other major tournaments, the two top teams in each group advance, and then two out of the three third place teams will advance, which will put 8 teams through, and the first knockout stage will be the quarterfinals. So round of 8, then the semifinals, round of 4, and then the championship match. And the last thing before I look a little bit at the teams is that I think this has the potential to be a really good tournament, really exciting for a bunch of different reasons. Pretty much I shouldn't say all, but most of the top women's football teams in the world are here. The ones that aren't are England/Great Britain because they would have been there, but it's kind of a complicated situation regarding the various FAs and because depending on if they represent as England or GB. So, and then also Japan's not there, which is really a shock in some ways, because they actually just didn't qualify out of the Asian Confederation. But in terms of the 12 teams that are there, I would say all of them are really known and experienced. The only one that is sort of making their debut on the international stage is Zimbabwe, and that's really interesting. They're in the second group, which I'll discuss in a second. But every other team, if you go through each team, I think is really proven and has a solid side. So I'm going to start to break down the groups now. So if you start off with Group Group E, I know that sounds weird, but the men's is Group A, B, C, and D, and then instead of doing A, B, and C for the women's, they just started at E, so they do E, F, and G. I don't know why they did that, because they're two separate tournaments, but it's alright. So if you look at Group E consists of Brazil, who's obviously the host, China, Sweden, and South Africa. All four of those teams are really good, so this group is going to be really exciting. I think that Brazil is probably, if there's like a favorite to be first out of the group, even though there's a possibility that 3 of the 4 teams can advance, I would say it's Brazil. Not only because they probably have the most talent, but also they're home. But the team I'm definitely looking out for is Sweden. They were a little bit disappointing in the World Cup last summer. But historically and just from a talent perspective, they're probably a top 5 team in the world right now. And they really should challenge Brazil. And if they would play on the second match day in this group, Brazil and Sweden. So if it comes down to who gets the top spot. And the spots could be important because then it matches up who faces who in the knockout stage. So if you're second or third, you might face a more difficult opponent. In terms of South Africa, the thing I would note is they just had a friendly against the U.S. women's national team, and they played really, really well, I have to say. Um, they could have won, frankly, or been a draw. They wound up losing by a goal. But it was a really good game, so I was really impressed by them. If they take that form into the Olympics, they can beat just about anybody. And the fourth team that I haven't talked about in this group is China. China did pretty good at the World Cup last year. They wound up losing to the U.S. in the quarters. But they did really good to qualify for this tournament. And I think that they're a team to look out for, maybe. Obviously, China used to have one of the best women's teams in the world, and they kill it off a little bit. But it looks like right now, at least, they have a good team, so we'll keep an eye on them. So then moving on to Group F, this is another really interesting group. So the 4 teams are Canada, Australia, Zimbabwe, and Germany. Like I mentioned, Zimbabwe maybe is the odd team out just because they're just unknown. Maybe they're incredible, but we just don't know yet. Canada is interesting because I think most people believe, have a really solid team. They obviously hosted the World Cup last year. Australia, a really solid team. And then Germany, of course. We all know about them. Very, very good team. So this is another group where I think it'll really come down to a tight finish, and it's going to be tough because if you think about it, a lot of, at least 3 teams in 2 of the groups will go through. So this might be if all 3 teams in this group get a win over Zimbabwe, which I don't think is automatic by any stretch, but if they do, then maybe this group has an advantage in terms of who would be that third team in as a third place team. Okay, then the Group G, again, another incredible group, is the United States, New Zealand, France, and Colombia. All 4 of these teams are really, really solid. Of course, you have the U.S., who is looking to become the first team to win the World Cup and the Olympics in back-to-back years. You have France, who might be, if not the most talented team in the world, certainly second to the U.S. Just a really incredible team. New Zealand, who maybe some people are a little unfamiliar with, but I really like watching them play. That's the U.S.'s first opponent, and if you get a chance, definitely watch that game. New Zealand is really good. And I think that they can surprise both potentially France and the U.S. in this group. And then Colombia is another interesting team because they have some injuries right now, unfortunately. But when they're at their best, they're really solid. They really, frankly, could have not easily, but they could have beaten the U.S. in the round of 16 last year at the World Cup. And so they are far from a pushover from any of the 3 other teams. So I'm not going to make any predictions here, but all in all, it should be a really interesting tournament. Hopefully everything goes off well in terms of the stadiums and the security and the weather. It should be good. From all accounts, the 2014 Men's World Cup there was smooth in terms of the logistics of it. So we'll see. Hopefully there's some worries, but hopefully everything off the field is taken care of. And then if it is, I think the on-field stuff will be incredible. So now to wrap up the video, I wanted to look a little deeper into the U.S. women's national team, who, as I mentioned, are looking to become the first team ever to win the World Cup and then the Olympics. So what I did was I made what I would have as my starting 11 if I was the coach. And if you want, either comment on this video or email me your thoughts on what your starting 11 would be and what you think of mine. There's not too many surprises in mine. Really, there can't be that many surprises because you only have 18 players to choose from. So it's really not that big of a squad. And I think if you just look at the lineups of the U.S. team leading up to this game, I think that you can make a pretty good guess. But I'll go ahead and give mine. So at goalkeeper, I think it's pretty obvious it's going to be Hope Solo. And then the back four, again, is, I think, in cement. So you have Megan Klingenberg at left back, Becky Sauerbrunn and Julie Johnson at the two center backs. Then you have Kelly O'Hara at right back. That's a little interesting because Ali Krieger was the right back at the Olympics last summer, but it seemed as if O'Hara, at least for now, has taken that spot. So then if you move forward, so I have them in a 4-2-3-1 formation. You can kind of play around with that a little bit, but let's just go to 4-2-3-1. My two holding midfielders, the first one, which might be a little bit of a surprise for some people, I would have Ali Long in there. I think she's really, really impressed. She doesn't have a ton of experience on the international stage, but the last couple of games she's played really well when she's been in that sort of holding role as a defensive-minded midfielder. And I think that she deserves a chance to start at least the first game in the Olympics, especially as Morgan Bryan recovers from her injury. Obviously, Morgan Bryan is a really good player, but I just think I would go with Ali Long for the start. So that's my first kind of surprise, I guess. And my second holding midfielder would be Lindsay Horan, who we'll see if she starts. Another younger player. Or, no, Ali Long is not necessarily young, but she's just inexperienced. But Horan is somewhat new to the national team. But I think she brings a lot to the table in terms of versatility, so she can play as a defensive midfielder. She's good size, so she's good in terms of both defending and attacking set pieces. And she used to play as a center forward type, so she's really good in the box and with the ball at her feet and can get a goal from that further back midfield spot. So those would be my two holding midfields. Then moving forward, I think in the number 10, it's pretty obvious if she's healthy that it'll be Carly Lloyd. So that's who I would have there. Then flanking her to the right attacking midfield, I would have Crystal Dunn. She's played really well since she got the call up, and I think that at least for the first game you have to start her just because she's been scoring so many goals that it would be really harsh to leave her out of the starting 11. And then a left attacking mid, which might be a little bit of a surprise, I would go with Mallory Pugh. She's been so good watching the games. She's arguably been the most dynamic player for this team that I just think it would be impossible to leave, or not impossible, really difficult for me to leave her out of the lineup if I was the manager. So that's why I have her in. So a lot of people might be surprised at that because I think probably the consensus is that Tobin Heath will be in that position. Tobin Heath is obviously a really, really talented player. I'm just saying, so it has nothing to do with her as much as just Pugh has been playing so well. That's what I would have in there. Because she brings so much, whether her speed and just her general dribbling ability is really good. And then up top, Alex Morgan at center forward if she's healthy. The other option would be Kristen Press, or you could probably play Crystal Dunn up there as well. But I think, so that would be my 11. So just recapping from the back to front: Solo, Klingenberg, Sauerbrunn, Johnston, O'Hara, Horan, Ali Long, Mallory Pugh, Lloyd, Dunn, and Alex Morgan. So that's my 11. So I'm really looking forward to this tournament. Like I said, I think it has the potential to be really, really exciting, and there's some real talent. Like if you look at France's team, Germany, the U.S. obviously, and then some teams like I mentioned that you might not necessarily expect, like New Zealand, and then Brazil as well. So this is going to be an exciting tournament. I hope everything goes smoothly. And let me know, either comment or email me with what your U.S. national team starting 11 will be. Okay, so we'll get excited for the Olympics. It's always fun. And don't forget that the football tournament starts 2 days before the opening ceremony. It's important to remember.